In a bustling city known for its vibrant mix of cultures, life moved at a fast pace. People from all walks of life called it home. And while diversity was celebrated, there were underlying tensions simmering beneath the surface. Among these tensions, the relationship between law enforcement and minority communities had long been a topic of heated discussion. Some officers worked hard to build trust with residents, but others seemed to fuel resentment through their actions. Late one evening, Commander James Patel, a respected senior naval officer, found himself caught in an unexpected storm. He had just attended an official military ceremony where he received recognition for his years of dedicated service. Dressed in his crisp, formal uniform, adorned with medals and ribbons, he felt proud of his accomplishments. His family back home would be thrilled when they heard about the honors bestowed upon him. As he drove toward his suburban neighborhood, the streets were quiet save for the occasional hum of passing cars. At a red light near a relatively empty intersection, everything changed. A patrol car suddenly pulled up beside him, its lights flashing brightly despite no apparent emergency. Commander Patel glanced over, curious about why the officer might have stopped. What happened next left him stunned. The driver's door opened, and Officer Mark Reynolds stepped out. Known within the department for his short temper and abrasive demeanor, Reynolds wasn't someone who inspired confidence among those he served. Reynolds approached Patel's vehicle without hesitation, shining his flashlight directly into the commander's face. "License and registration," he barked, his tone sharp and demanding. There was no explanation given for the sudden stop, nor did Reynolds provide any indication that something was amiss. For a moment, Patel hesitated, not out of defiance but confusion. He hadn't broken any traffic laws, and his mind raced trying to understand what could have prompted this encounter. As Patel reached for his wallet to retrieve his ID, Reynolds leaned closer, peering into the car with narrowed eyes. "What's your name?" he asked gruffly, though he already held Patel's license in his hand. Without waiting for an answer, he sneered. "You don't look like someone who should be wearing that uniform. Are you even supposed to be driving around here?" The comment stung, but Patel chose not to respond immediately. Instead, he maintained his composure, knowing that reacting emotionally would only escalate the situation. Over the years, he'd learned to stay calm under pressure, a skill honed during his time in the Navy. But inside, frustration bubbled. How could someone judge him based solely on his appearance? Hadn't he earned respect through decades of service? Passers-by began to notice the unusual scene unfolding at the intersection. A young couple walking their dog paused nearby, exchanging worried glances. Across the street, a teenager stood frozen, her phone raised as she recorded the interaction. Even other drivers stuck at the light couldn't help but watch, sensing that something was terribly wrong. The tension in the air was palpable, thick, enough to choke on. Officer Reynolds, seemingly oblivious to the growing audience, continued his tirade. "Do you think we need people like you in our country?" he spat, his voice rising above the gentle hum of idling engines. Each word landed like a punch, heavy with disdain. It became clear to everyone present that this wasn't just a routine traffic stop. It was something far more sinister. Reynolds' behavior crossed lines that most would consider unacceptable, especially when directed at someone in uniform representing the nation. Despite the hostility directed at him, Commander Patel refused to let fear take hold. He reminded himself of the values instilled in him throughout his career: honor, courage, commitment. These weren't mere words. They were principles he lived by every day. Still, the situation grew increasingly precarious. Reynolds grew more agitated, pacing back and forth beside the car as if searching for a reason to justify his aggression. His body language screamed unpredictability, leaving Patel uncertain of what might happen next. Unbeknownst to either man, the recordings being captured by witnesses would soon become crucial pieces of evidence. Phones clicked and screens lit up as more bystanders joined in documenting the incident. Some whispered nervously to each other, wondering whether they should intervene or call for backup. Others simply stared, too shocked to act. In that moment, The intersection transformed into a stage where issues of race, authority, and justice collided head-on. For Commander Patel, the minutes stretched endlessly. Time seemed to slow as he sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, tightly, heart pounding in his chest. Though outwardly calm, his mind raced with questions. Would this escalate further? Was his safety truly at risk? And perhaps most importantly, how could such blatant prejudice exist unchecked in modern society? Little did he know, this encounter would spark a chain reaction far beyond anything he could have anticipated. As the red light turned green, signaling the end of the brief pause in traffic, the standoff remained unresolved. Other drivers cautiously edged forward, unwilling to draw attention to themselves. Yet the spotlight remained firmly fixed on Reynolds and Patel, two men whose lives and futures were about to intersect in ways neither could have foreseen. What started as an ordinary night had spiraled into something extraordinary, setting the stage for a story that would captivate the nation and ignite conversations about accountability, fairness, and change. The tension at the intersection reached a boiling point as Officer Reynolds' behavior grew increasingly erratic. Ignoring basic protocol and completely disregarding the humanity of the man sitting in the car before him, Reynolds did something that shocked everyone present. He drew his gun. The metallic click of the weapon being unholstered echoed through the quiet night, sending a chill down the spines of witnesses. Without warning, Reynolds pointed the firearm directly at Commander Patel through the car window, his hand steady, but his face contorted with anger. Commander Patel froze, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He had faced dangerous situations during his time in the Navy, storms at sea, high-stakes missions, even moments where split-second decisions meant life or death. But nothing could have prepared him for this. Here he was, unarmed and compliant, yet staring down the barrel of a gun wielded by someone who was supposed to protect and serve. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Was this really how it would end? Over a traffic stop? Because of the color of his skin? Reynolds didn't stop there. As if drawing his weapon wasn't enough, he lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke lazily into the cool night air. It was a bizarre and unsettling sight. A police officer casually smoking, while holding a civilian at gunpoint. To make matters worse, Reynolds resumed hurling insults, mocking Patel's rank and questioning whether someone like him deserved to wear the uniform of a naval officer. "You think you're better than us?" Reynolds sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're nothing but a glorified pretender." Bystanders watched in horror, unable to believe what they were seeing. Some clutched their phones tighter, ensuring they captured every detail of the escalating confrontation. Others whispered prayers under their breath, hoping the situation wouldn't spiral further out of control. A young mother standing nearby covered her child's eyes, shielding them from the disturbing scene unfolding before them. Across the street, the teenager who had started recording earlier zoomed in on Reynolds' face, capturing the venomous expression etched across it. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Commander Patel remained remarkably composed. Years of discipline taught him to stay calm under pressure, no matter how dire the circumstances. His training kicked in, reminding him not to make any sudden movements that might provoke Reynolds further. Still, staying still didn't mean he wasn't afraid. Every second felt like an eternity, each tick of the clock amplifying the danger lurking in the air. Patel's thoughts turned to his family, his wife, who always waited up for him when he worked late, and his children, whose faces lit up whenever he walked through the door. What would happen to them if this ended badly? Meanwhile, Reynolds seemed oblivious to the growing crowd of spectators. If anything, their presence only fueled his aggression. He began pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath, occasionally glancing at Patel with undisguised hostility. At one point, he leaned closer to the car window, tapping the barrel of the gun against the glass as if to emphasize his dominance. "You hear me, don't you?" he growled, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Answer me." Patel finally spoke, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Officer," he said calmly, choosing his words carefully, "I am cooperating fully. I have done nothing wrong. Please tell me why I've been stopped." His tone carried a quiet authority. the kind that came from years of leadership and responsibility. But instead of diffusing the situation, his response only seemed to infuriate Reynolds further. "You're lying," Reynolds snapped, jabbing the gun toward Patel again. "People like you always lie. You think you can walk around acting all high and mighty because of that fancy uniform? Let me tell you something. You're not fooling anyone." The absurdity of the accusation struck a nerve with those watching. Here was a decorated naval officer, a man who had dedicated his life to serving his country, being berated and threatened by someone sworn to uphold justice. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker. While Patel embodied dignity and restraint, Reynolds represented everything that was wrong with unchecked power and prejudice. As the standoff dragged on, the atmosphere grew heavier. The red light had long since turned green, yet neither man moved. Cars began honking impatiently behind them, but the noise barely registered over the mounting tension. Some drivers decided to go around, weaving cautiously through the intersection, to avoid becoming entangled in the drama. Others stayed put, unwilling to leave until they saw how this nightmare would resolve. One brave bystander, a middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap, stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Hey, officer," he called out tentatively. "Is everything okay here? Do you need backup?" His question hung in the air, unanswered. Reynolds shot him a glare so fierce that the man quickly retreated, realizing he wasn't going to get anywhere. Back in his car, Patel continued to weigh his options. Part of him wanted to defend himself, to remind Reynolds of who he was and what he stood for. But another part knew that arguing would only escalate things further. Instead, he focused on maintaining eye contact with Reynolds, not out of defiance, but as a way to humanize himself. He hoped that somewhere deep down, beneath all the anger and hatred, there might still be a shred of decency left in the man pointing the gun at him. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second dragging on like hours. Just when it felt like the situation couldn't get any worse, a new sound pierced the night, the distant wail of sirens. Someone must have called 911, unable to bear the injustice playing out before their eyes. For a brief moment, hope flickered in Patel's chest. Maybe reinforcements would arrive and restore order. Maybe this nightmare would finally come to an end. But as the sirens grew louder, Reynolds' demeanor shifted. He glanced over his shoulder nervously, then back at Patel, his grip tightening on the gun. It was clear he realized he was losing control of the narrative. With a final sneer, he barked, "Stay right there," before retreating to his patrol car. Slamming the door shut, he sped off into the night, leaving behind a stunned crowd and a shaken Commander Patel. For several moments, no one moved. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of engines and the distant echoes of the sirens now approaching the scene. Witnesses exchanged looks of disbelief, unsure of what to do next. One thing was certain: what they had just witnessed was unforgettable, and it wouldn't be swept under the rug without consequences. Within hours of the tense encounter at the intersection, the story began to spread like wildfire. Videos recorded by bystanders found their way onto social media platforms, capturing not only Officer Reynolds' aggressive behavior, but also the calm dignity displayed by Commander James Patel throughout the ordeal. The footage was raw and unfiltered, showing every detail: the drawn gun, the lit cigarette, the venomous words exchanged. It didn't take long for the hashtag #JusticeForPatel to start trending nationwide, drawing attention from people across the country who were appalled by what they saw. The initial reactions came swiftly. Veterans groups were among the first to speak out, condemning Reynolds' actions as an attack not just on Patel, but on the principles of respect and honor that the military stood for. Prominent figures within the Navy released statements, expressing solidarity with Patel, emphasizing his exemplary service record and calling for accountability. Civil rights organizations joined the chorus, framing the incident as yet another example of systemic racism and abuse of power. For many watching online or reading about it in the news, this wasn't just a single event. It was symbolic of larger issues plaguing society. Local news outlets quickly picked up the story, interviewing witnesses who had been present at the scene. The young couple walking their dog recounted how frightened they felt as they watched the confrontation unfold. "It was surreal," said Sarah Miller, clutching her partner's hand during the interview. "We've seen arguments between cops and civilians before, but nothing like this. This man was clearly targeting Commander Patel because of the color of his skin." Across the street, the teenager who had filmed much of the incident shared her perspective. Her video had gone viral, amassing millions of views in less than a day. "I couldn't believe what I was seeing," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "When he pulled out the gun, I thought something terrible was going to happen. That's why I kept recording. Someone needed to document it." As the public outcry intensified, pressure mounted on the police department to respond. Initially, officials tried to downplay the situation, issuing vague statements about conducting an internal investigation. But the sheer volume of calls, emails, and messages flooding their offices made it impossible to ignore the demand for answers. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters, holding signs that read, "Accountability now," and "Protect our heroes." Community leaders addressed the crowd, urging calm while demanding justice for Patel. Meanwhile, Commander Patel remained largely silent in the immediate aftermath of the incident. He returned home shaken but determined to process what had happened. His wife, Mira, listened quietly as he recounted the events of the night, tears streaming down her face. Their children, sensing the gravity of the moment, stayed close, offering hugs and reassurance. Despite the trauma of the experience, Patel refused to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he focused on finding a way to turn this personal injustice into something meaningful, a chance to spark change. By mid-morning the following day, Patel decided it was time to address the public directly. Standing outside Naval headquarters, flanked by fellow officers and community supporters, he spoke with poise and clarity. "What happened to me last night is not unique," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "Far too many individuals, especially those from marginalized communities, have faced similar treatment at the hands of law enforcement. While my uniform may have shielded me from physical harm, others are not so fortunate." His speech struck a chord with listeners. Rather than seeking revenge or vilifying Reynolds personally, Patel called for systemic reform. He emphasized the importance of training officers to recognize and combat implicit biases, advocating for stronger oversight mechanisms to hold bad actors accountable. "We must work together to build trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve," he said. "This isn't about punishment, it's about progress." Patel's message resonated deeply, turning him into a symbol of resilience and integrity. News outlets praised his measured response, highlighting how he chose to rise above hatred rather than succumb to anger. Social media users flooded comment sections with messages of support, sharing stories of their own experiences with discrimination. Even politicians weighed in, some promising to introduce legislation aimed at addressing police misconduct and racial profiling. Back at the police department, the tide was turning against Officer Reynolds. Internal investigators reviewed the videos alongside witness testimonies, piecing together a damning narrative of his conduct. Dashcam footage from Reynolds' patrol car confirmed Patel's account, showing no justification for the stop or the use of force. Further digging revealed troubling patterns in Reynolds' past cases, instances where he had targeted individuals based on race, often using excessive force without consequence. Fellow officers, once hesitant to speak out, began coming forward with accounts of his volatile temper and disregard for protocol. Public scrutiny reached fever pitch when a local journalist uncovered documents detailing multiple complaints filed against Reynolds over the years. Many of these allegations had been dismissed or buried, raising questions about whether higher-ups had turned a blind eye to his behavior. The revelation sparked outrage, prompting calls for broader investigations into the department's handling of misconduct cases. Protesters expanded their demands, insisting that accountability extend beyond one rogue officer to encompass the entire system that allowed such behavior to persist. In response to mounting pressure, city officials announced plans to launch an independent review of the police department's practices. A task force comprising community members, Legal experts and retired law enforcement professionals would examine policies related to racial bias, use of force, and disciplinary actions. The move was met with cautious optimism, though skepticism lingered. Past promises of reform had often fallen short, leaving many wary of empty gestures. Despite the chaos swirling around him, Reynolds clung to denial. In a brief statement issued through his attorney, he claimed that his actions were justified and accused Patel of resisting authority. However, the lack of evidence supporting his claims and the overwhelming proof to the contrary made his defense appear increasingly desperate. Behind closed doors, sources within the police union hinted that Reynolds might be offered early retirement in exchange for stepping down quietly. Such deals were common in cases involving high-profile scandals, allowing departments to sidestep prolonged legal battles. For Commander Patel, the days following the incident were a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, he felt grateful for the outpouring of support from strangers who rallied behind him. On the other, he struggled with the knowledge that countless others had endured similar, or worse, experiences without receiving justice. Late at night, after putting his children to bed, he sat alone in his study reflecting on the road ahead. He knew that real change wouldn't come easily, but he also believed it was possible if enough people committed to working toward it. As the story dominated headlines and conversations across the nation, it became clear that this was more than just a personal grievance. It was a catalyst for dialogue. People from all walks of life engaged in discussions about race, privilege, and accountability, challenging themselves to confront uncomfortable truths. Schools incorporated the incident into lessons on civic responsibility, encouraging students to think critically about the role of law enforcement in society. Religious leaders delivered sermons on forgiveness and reconciliation, urging congregants to channel their anger into constructive action. In the midst of it all, Commander Patel emerged as a beacon of hope. His refusal to let hatred define him inspired countless individuals to reevaluate their own responses to adversity. Whether through small acts of kindness or large-scale advocacy efforts, people began taking steps toward healing divides. And, while the journey ahead promised to be long and difficult, the collective momentum generated by Patel's courage suggested that meaningful change was within reach. The fallout from the incident continued to ripple through the community and beyond, as the investigation into Officer Mark Reynolds' actions reached its climax. The Internal Review Board, armed with undeniable evidence from videos, dashcam footage, and witness testimonies, had little choice but to act decisively. After days of deliberation behind closed doors, they announced their findings. Reynolds had violated multiple departmental policies, including those related to excessive use of force, racial profiling, and unprofessional conduct. His behavior during the encounter with Commander James Patel was deemed completely unacceptable and a clear abuse of authority. Despite the gravity of these conclusions, some members of the public remained skeptical. Over the years, many similar cases involving police misconduct had ended in mere slaps on the wrist, suspended officers quietly reassigned or allowed to retire without facing significant consequences. This time, however, the pressure to hold Reynolds accountable came not only from activists and victims' advocates, but also from within the ranks of law enforcement itself. Several high-ranking officials spoke out publicly, acknowledging that tolerating such behavior undermined trust in policing as an institution. For once, it seemed that accountability might actually prevail. Reynolds' fate was sealed when he was formally terminated from the police force. The decision sent shockwaves through both the department and the wider community. Some colleagues defended him, arguing that his termination set a dangerous precedent for officers working under stressful conditions. Others breathed sighs of relief, seeing it as a necessary step toward restoring faith in the badge. Meanwhile, outside observers celebrated the news, viewing it as a rare victory for justice in cases of alleged police brutality. But firing Reynolds wasn't the end of the story. Criminal charges soon followed, adding another layer of complexity to the case. Prosecutors filed charges against him for assault with a deadly weapon, misuse of power, and hate crimes stemming from the racially charged language he used during the confrontation. These charges carried serious penalties, including potential jail time if convicted. Legal experts noted that securing a conviction would be challenging. Juries often hesitated to side against law enforcement officers, even when damning evidence existed. Nevertheless, the prosecution vowed to pursue the case aggressively, ensuring that every available resource was utilized to bring Reynolds to justice. As the legal proceedings unfolded, attention turned back to Commander Patel. Despite everything he had endured, Patel refused to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he channeled his energy into advocating for systemic change. He began collaborating with civil rights organizations, sharing his story at rallies, town halls, and legislative hearings. His presence commanded respect, not because of his rank or medals, but because of the quiet strength and humility with which he carried himself. People listened intently whenever he spoke, moved by his ability to rise above hatred while still demanding accountability. Patel's advocacy extended beyond speeches. He worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between military personnel and local law enforcement, recognizing that mistrust often stemmed from misunderstandings on both sides. Drawing on his own experiences, he proposed initiatives aimed at fostering mutual respect and cooperation. One idea involved hosting joint training sessions where police officers and service members could learn from each other's perspectives. Another focused on creating advisory boards comprised of civilians, veterans, and active duty personnel to provide feedback on policing practices. Though these efforts required patience and persistence, Patel believed they were essential steps toward lasting reform. While Patel sought solutions, the police department grappled with its own reckoning. Under mounting scrutiny, leadership implemented sweeping changes designed to address the systemic issues highlighted by the scandal. Mandatory anti-racism training became a cornerstone of officer development programs, replacing outdated courses that had done little to curb discriminatory behavior. New guidelines were introduced to regulate the use of firearms, emphasizing de-escalation tactics over aggressive intervention. Perhaps most significantly, an independent oversight committee was established to monitor complaints against officers and ensure investigations were conducted fairly and transparently. These reforms sparked mixed reactions. Supporters praised the department for taking meaningful action, pointing to the measures as proof that institutions could evolve when pushed. Critics, however, argued that the changes didn't go far enough, calling for more drastic overhauls, like defunding certain divisions or reallocating resources to community-based safety programs. Debates raged on social media, in town hall meetings, and around dinner tables, reflecting the deep divides that still existed regarding how best to achieve equitable policing. Amidst all this turmoil, one thing became abundantly clear. The incident involving Commander Patel and Officer Reynolds had ignited a national conversation about race, power, and accountability. What started as a single confrontation at a red light had grown into something far greater, a movement fueled by shared outrage and a collective desire for change. Stories poured in from across the country, as people recounted their own encounters with bias and injustice. Some tales mirrored Patel's experience, while others shed light on different aspects of systemic inequality. Together, they formed a tapestry of voices united in their call for progress. For Patel, the journey was bittersweet. On one hand, he felt immense pride knowing that his ordeal had inspired so many to take action. On the other, he couldn't shake the knowledge that countless others had suffered silently, their stories never told. Late at night, after attending yet another meeting or speaking engagement, he would sit alone in his study, reflecting on the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. He knew that real change wouldn't come overnight. It would require sustained effort and unwavering commitment, but he also believed it was possible. One evening, as he scrolled through messages of support flooding his inbox, Patel paused on a note from a young girl who had seen him speak at a local school. "Thank you for standing up," she wrote. "You make me believe that things can get better." Her words brought tears to his eyes. In that moment, he realized that his resilience wasn't just about seeking justice for himself. It was about giving hope to future generations. If even one child grew up believing in fairness and equality because of what he had done, Then every sleepless night and every painful memory would be worth it. Back in court, the trial against Reynolds progressed slowly but steadily. Prosecutors presented video evidence, expert testimony, and first-hand accounts from witnesses, painting a vivid picture of the harm caused by his actions. Defense attorneys countered by attempting to cast doubt on the credibility of the footage and questioning the motives of those who had reported Reynolds. Tensions ran high in the courtroom, with supporters of both sides packing the benches. Journalists scribbled furiously, capturing every detail for their reports. The nation watched closely, aware that the outcome would send a powerful message about accountability in policing. When the verdict finally came down, it marked a pivotal moment in the ongoing struggle for justice. Reynolds was found guilty on multiple counts, including assault and hate crimes. Sentencing followed shortly thereafter, with the judge delivering a stern rebuke before handing down punishment. "Your actions betrayed the very principles you swore to uphold," she declared. "This sentence reflects not only the severity of your crimes but also the need to restore trust in our institutions." Though the ruling brought closure to some, others recognized that true healing would take much longer. For Commander Patel, the verdict represented validation, not just of his personal experience, but of the broader fight against prejudice and abuse of power. As he stood outside the courthouse afterward, surrounded by family, friends, and supporters, he offered a simple yet profound statement. "This is not the end. It's a beginning." And indeed, it was. Across the country, communities continued to push for reforms, inspired by Patel's courage and determination. Conversations that had once been taboo now dominated mainstream discourse, challenging individuals to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, bias, and responsibility. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in the walls of systemic injustice, letting light shine through. For Commander James Patel, the road ahead remained long and uncertain. But as he looked out at the faces of those who had joined him in the fight, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Change was hard, messy, and often painful, but it was also possible. And as long as there were people willing to stand together and demand better, hope would always endure. The aftermath of Officer Mark Reynolds' conviction marked a turning point, not just for Commander James Patel, but for the entire community. The guilty verdict served as a powerful reminder that accountability was possible, even in cases involving those who wielded authority. Yet, while justice had been served in this instance, it became increasingly clear that systemic change required more than holding one individual responsible. It demanded sustained effort, collaboration, and an unwavering commitment to addressing the root causes of prejudice and inequality. In the weeks following the trial, the police department moved forward with its reform initiatives, determined to rebuild trust with the public. Mandatory anti-racism training sessions were held regularly, featuring workshops led by experts in diversity and inclusion. Officers participated in role-playing exercises designed to help them recognize implicit biases and respond appropriately in high-pressure situations. Some initially resisted these changes, viewing them as unnecessary or overly intrusive. However, over time, many began to see value in the process, particularly when they heard first-hand accounts from community members about how past interactions with law enforcement had left lasting scars. One innovative program introduced during this period involved pairing officers with civilian mentors, individuals from diverse backgrounds who could offer guidance and perspective on fostering positive relationships. These partnerships proved transformative, allowing officers to step outside their usual routines and engage with residents in meaningful ways. For example, an officer assigned to mentorship with a local business owner learned about the challenges faced by immigrant families trying to navigate bureaucratic systems. Another partnered with a teacher who shared stories of students traumatized by aggressive policing tactics. Through these connections, officers gained insight into the human impact of their work, shifting their mindset from enforcement to empathy. Meanwhile, Commander Patel continued his advocacy efforts, expanding his reach beyond local boundaries. He traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, universities, and community forums about the importance of bridging divides between different sectors of society. His message resonated deeply because it wasn't rooted in anger or resentment, it was grounded in hope and resilience. "We cannot erase the past," he often said, "but we can shape the future. Together we have the power to create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." Patel's influence extended far beyond words. Inspired by his vision, grassroots organizations sprang up in cities nationwide, dedicated to promoting dialogue and understanding between law enforcement and marginalized communities. In some areas, citizen-led task forces collaborated with police departments to review policies and propose improvements. Elsewhere, youth groups organized events aimed at breaking down stereotypes, inviting officers to participate in basketball, tournaments, art projects, and cultural festivals. These small yet significant gestures helped chip away at decades of mistrust, proving that progress was possible when people came together with open hearts and minds. At the national level, lawmakers took notice of the growing momentum for reform. Several bills were introduced in Congress, focusing on issues such as increased transparency in policing, stricter oversight mechanisms, and funding for community-based programs. While debates raged over specific provisions, there was bipartisan agreement that change was long overdue. Patel testified before legislative committees, sharing his personal story and urging representatives to prioritize measures that would protect vulnerable populations without undermining the integrity of law enforcement. His testimony brought tears to the eyes of many listeners, underscoring the emotional weight of the issue. Back home, Patel's family remained his anchor through it all. His wife, Meera, supported him tirelessly, managing logistics and providing comfort during moments of doubt. Their children, now older and more aware of what had happened, expressed pride in their father's courage. They began volunteering alongside him, participating in outreach programs and helping organize events. Watching them grow into compassionate individuals filled Patel with immense gratitude, reinforcing his belief that every action mattered, not just for today, but for generations to come. As months turned into years, tangible signs of progress emerged. Crime rates dropped in neighborhoods where police-community relations improved, thanks in part to proactive problem-solving approaches rather than reactive enforcement strategies. Residents reported feeling safer and more valued, knowing that officers were genuinely invested in their well-being. Schools implemented curricula focused on teaching students about civic responsibility and conflict resolution, empowering young people to become agents of change. Even media coverage shifted slightly, highlighting success stories instead of solely focusing on failures. Of course, challenges persisted. Not everyone embraced the reforms enthusiastically, and resistance occasionally flared up in unexpected places. Some officers retired early rather than adapt to new protocols, while others grumbled about feeling scrutinized unfairly. Certain segments of the population remained skeptical, questioning whether superficial changes masked deeper problems. Yet despite these hurdles, the overall trajectory pointed toward growth and healing. For Patel, the journey was both exhausting and exhilarating. There were days when fatigue threatened to overwhelm him, when the sheer scale of the work ahead seemed insurmountable. But then he would receive a letter from a stranger thanking him for inspiring them to speak out against injustice, or witness a heartfelt exchange between an officer and a resident who had once viewed each other as adversaries. Those moments reminded him why he kept going. They fueled his determination to keep pushing forward. Looking back on everything that had transpired, Patel reflected on how much had changed since that fateful night at the intersection. What began as a terrifying encounter had evolved into a catalyst for transformation, sparking conversations and actions that transcended borders and ideologies. He realized that true leadership wasn't about wielding power. It was about using one's voice and experiences to uplift others. And though scars remained, from the trauma of facing a loaded gun to the emotional toll of reliving painful memories, he wore them as badges of honor, symbols of survival and strength. On a quiet evening several years later, Patel stood on a stage at a national summit on racial equity and social justice. Thousands of attendees filled the auditorium, representing Diverse walks of life united by a shared goal, creating a better tomorrow. As he prepared to deliver his closing remarks, Patel paused, taking in the sea of faces before him. Many clutched pens and notebooks, eager to capture wisdom they could carry back to their own communities. Others simply listened, nodding along, as he spoke. Change is never easy, Patel began, his voice steady and clear. It requires patience, perseverance, and above all, faith in humanity. But let me tell you something. I have seen the best of humanity in recent years. I've witnessed strangers coming together to support one another, leaders stepping up to do what's right, and ordinary people achieving extraordinary things. We are capable of so much more than we give ourselves credit for. He concluded, with a call to action, urging everyone present to continue advocating for fairness and equality. This is not the end of our journey. It's merely the beginning. Let us carry this momentum forward, working hand in hand to build a world where no one has to fear discrimination or abuse. Together, we can turn pain into purpose and division into unity. Applause erupted throughout the hall, echoing like thunder as people rose to their feet. Tears streamed down cheeks, hands reached out to embrace neighbors, and promises were made to keep fighting for a brighter future. For Commander James Patel, this moment embodied everything he had worked toward, a testament to the enduring power of hope, resilience, and collective action. And as he stepped off the stage, surrounded by supporters and friends, Patel allowed himself a rare smile. The road ahead would undoubtedly be long and challenging, but he knew he wouldn't walk it alone. With countless others standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to face whatever obstacles lay ahead, the dream of a fairer, kinder world felt closer than ever.